Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to the Best New Features in Exchange 2010 SP2 webinar, presented by our very own Exchange MVP, J. Peter Bruzzese. I'm Miles Wilson from TrainSignal, and I'd like to take a minute to tell you about what to expect in the next hour. The presentation will take approximately 60 minutes, which will include questions and answers throughout. Feel free to submit your questions in the questions box throughout the presentation. Also, do use the questions box if you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, and we'll do our best to assist you. Today's presentation will be recorded and will be available to view shortly after the presentation concludes at trainsignal.com/blog/webinars. Don't worry if you weren't able to get all that down. We will email you the information about how to view the recording after the presentation. Now, after you exit the webinar, you will be prompted to take a short survey. TrainSignal wants to hear from you, so please take a few minutes to complete this survey for us. We'll also choose one participant from today's audience to receive a copy of our Exchange Server 2010 training with the new SP2 content. Now, in order to be eligible to win, you will need to fill out that quick survey that follows the presentation. If you have any additional comments or feedback, feel free to send us an email at webinars@trainsignal.com. With that, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and here's Peter.
Greetings, and thank you, Miles. All right, so we're going to get started today. Very exciting. We're going to be talking about best new features in Exchange 2010 SP2. And so there's a lot of great features we're going to be talking about, but it's good to note that Service Pack 2, it's not a monumental service pack. It's not like it's going to change many of your worlds. It may have some features that you really need or that you've been waiting for, and then again, maybe it doesn't. So we'll talk about which features really may apply to you, and that may help you in terms of making a decision about how quickly you need to deploy Service Pack 2 in your organization. Make no mistake about it, though, you do want to deploy Service Pack 2. And the reason for that is because it doesn't just contain these new features, but it contains the various roll-ups that have been deployed over the past year or so. I believe we're up to 6 roll-ups for Exchange, so it crashes it all together into one service pack, and you certainly want to make sure you're as up-to-date as possible. It helps with the performance of your Exchange server, and it certainly makes sure that all of these little patches and fixes are included. So let's just talk for a moment. For those of you who have perhaps never heard of me before, I'll give you a modest bio. So show of hands out there, how many of you that are signed in, how many of you have seen or heard of me before or listened to one of my videos before? Raise a hand if you can do that. Okay, I'm just kidding. I can't see you. So ultimately, we could have made that a poll question. We'll have a couple of poll questions in a little bit. But my name is J. Peter Bruzzese. I'm a Microsoft MVP for Exchange with current certification acronyms that are listed out here: Triple MCSE, MCITP for Enterprise Messaging, MCTS for SharePoint Server, A+, Network+, INET+, CIW, CNA, CCNA. Yes, I like taking exams. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer as well, a technical author with over a dozen books that have been sold internationally to my credit. And it's interesting because most of the books I write are either about server technology or Active Directory or Exchange. I've written a few fun books, especially recently. I just finished a book called Conversational Geek in 7 Days, which is sort of an explanation of all the jokes and things that you see in the TV show The Big Bang Theory. And so in addition to that, I'm a technical speaker for conferences like Tech Mentor, Tech Ed, Connections, and a variety of different other venues that perhaps you attend. Now that's my modest bio. You might be wondering, well, okay, other than being an Exchange MVP, why else are you qualified to talk about Service Pack 2? Well, just to let you know, Exchange is my passion. I've been working with and teaching Exchange for 10+ years. Now, I'll tell you the reason for that, and I'll be quite honest and blunt. The fact is that I tried my hand at SQL, and I was no good at it. I really didn't understand database relationships and things of that sort. And back in my day, when we first get your MCSE back 10, 15 years ago, the idea was that you had to pick a subject that you would now sort of specialize in. For me, databases, it wasn't for me, so I went toward Exchange. So I liked it. I did well with it. And over the years, I've been an Exchange instructor for a variety of different training agencies and private corporations. I had an opportunity to work with Microsoft on the Administrator's Companion. I've written books, as I mentioned earlier, started websites like exclusivelyexchange.com. And most importantly in my career, I have the ability to participate in the Microsoft TAP program for Exchange 2010, and now for Exchange 2010 Service Pack 2, and for E15. Now what that means is that before you even start to see betas of these products go live, I've had the chance to already work with it for months. And I work very closely with the Exchange team and those that are developing Exchange up at Microsoft. So that's really nice. It gives me an opportunity to see things ahead of time. So whereas Service Pack 2 just went live not too long ago, I've been playing with it for months. Other than that, I'm a journalist for InfoWorld. I write the Enterprise Windows column, so perhaps you've read some of my work there. And that's pretty much it as far as my bio. Now it's time to really get into the discussion itself. Before we do that, I'd like to just throw a few poll questions at you. For starters, where are you from? Let me launch that your way. We'll give you a few minutes to respond there. Okay, so for the most part we have 87% that have 88% that have voted. We'll close that out. I'll share the response. And now everyone here can see. There you go. You can see that the majority are from North America and South America. We have Europe, some from Asia, and we have some from Australia. Hey, nice to talk to you. I think that's a first for me to have someone from Australia. So this is great. The next question I have for you folks is I'd like to know which version of Exchange you're using. All right, so we have about 81%, 83%. We're getting there. All right, very good. So we'll close this one out, and I'll share that with you. So you can see that the majority of those attending are already looking at Exchange 2010 for the platform. So it's 73%. There are 16% using Exchange 2007, and 11% using Exchange 2003 or earlier. So that's good because it gives me an idea as far as where everyone's at and why you might be working with Exchange the way you are and so forth. Somebody made a comment that perhaps you're in a mixed environment, and that's true, of course, as well. I guess my main question was, are you using Exchange 2010, and to what degree? So perhaps you are in a mixed environment. Okay, so let's start looking then at the features for, we'll close this out, and let's start looking at the features that we're going to be discussing for Service Pack 2. So there's the Outlook Web App Mini, cross-site silent Outlook Web App Redirection. There's a new method for enabling the mailbox replication service. There's an easier way of disabling Outlook Mailbox auto mapping. And there's multi-valued custom attributes that have been added, as well as an adjustment to litigation hold. So let's get started with the first one. And by the way, if you have any questions, by all means, just start throwing your questions out whenever you feel comfortable doing that, because we will break between these different features to answer the questions. So we won't just save them all toward the end. So let's talk about the hybrid configuration wizard. Most folks are used to either an on-premises deployment or a cloud-only deployment. So they either have their server on-premises because, let's say, they're concerned excessively about security, or they have the infrastructure already in place and perhaps they have the IT administration there that they can utilize, so they're not as concerned about having an on-premises deployment. In other cases, perhaps you're a small business environment and you're looking at a hosted cloud-only deployment for your users, and so typically you have these two different options. But it's nice if there would be a way to merge the two together, to have a hybrid deployment. The other thing is that when you do have some kind of a hybrid deployment, in the sense that maybe you have on-premises as well as an in-the-cloud offering, you don't manage these through the same tools. So you use your Exchange tools in-house and then whatever tools are given by your hosted provider. And typically that's some form of browser-based tool set that in some cases is very good and very robust, and in other cases, in just the reviews that I've done of a variety of different hosted solutions, sometimes the tools kind of stink. That's just the way it is. So Office 365 offers you the tools that you need in one sense to work with Exchange, and there's the Exchange control panel, which you can utilize for your on-cloud. But Exchange 2010 combined with a cloud-based solution like Office 365, if you could combine these two in a hybrid deployment, it gives the opportunity to manage both through a single set of tools. So I say that as if what I'm really, I don't want you to get the wrong impression that what I'm saying is that everything you can do with your on-premises, you'll now be able to do with your Office 365 because you have this hybrid deployment. That's not accurate. There are certain things you can do and certain things you can't. But now, for those who say, well, why would I want to do this? You may want a hybrid deployment for a variety of practical reasons. In some cases, the cost. In some cases, the management features. One solution that people tend to go toward is when they need a grouping of mailboxes that they don't really want to worry too much about. Perhaps, let's say your company hires 100 or 200 temps each year, and you want to give them mailboxes, but you don't really want to have to add this to your list of things to be concerned about. You can always throw them in the cloud with an Office 365 solution, pay the monthly fee, and then they worry about the availability. They worry about things like the disaster recovery side to that and the amount of storage that it's going to take and so on. So sometimes there's a practical reason for doing it. Now, if you have ever done the hybrid between Exchange 2010 SP1 and your Office 365, then you know there's about 50 manual steps according to the Exchange team. And it's not just that there are 50 steps like click here, that's a step, click there and type in this, that's a step. No, there's actually 50 different steps with sub-steps as well. So everything from configuring single sign-on to configuring federated delegation, these are all parts or steps that are required in order for you to get this to work. And it's a real nightmare, actually. The setup is pretty overwhelming. Now, you might say, well, okay, it may be overwhelming, but I'd like to see these steps. I'd like to know how I would go about doing this. Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. The easiest is probably to use the Deployment Assistant. This is a tool that if you haven't worked with it yet, it's really a must. It's a free online tool. All you have to do is do a quick search for Deployment Assistant Exchange 2010, and it will take you to it will take you to a website that will show you your different options, whether it's on-premises, in the cloud, or hybrid. And the only unfortunate thing is that currently, and maybe this will change tomorrow, but as of today, the current Deployment Assistant is designed around Exchange 2010 Service Pack 1. So the hybrid configuration part will still show you all of the 50 manual steps that are involved, and it literally will tell you exactly how to do it. So it's a great assistant, it's a great tool from the Exchange team, and we appreciate that. They're saying that very soon they'll update that so that you'll have the SP2 settings for the hybrid configuration wizard. Now, the new hybrid configuration wizard takes that former 50-step process and it makes it into a nice wizard that requires just a few clicks and some information to begin automating the process. Now, it sounds easy. It sounds like maybe it's too easy. It's not really true. There's a lot of planning that's involved. There's still a lot of work that goes into this in terms of adding the Office 365 into your Exchange Management Console as an additional forest. That has to be done first. And then even though you can start the wizard and get things moving forward, that's just the first part of it. Then you have to go in and you have to work through the various screens and provide the information requested in order for the wizard to do the next part. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but it's certainly a whole lot easier than the process that existed with Service Pack 1. Now, I mentioned that the wizard will not do everything and that the management between the two is not necessarily something that you'll be able to do everything in the cloud that you can do on premises. That's just not accurate. The wizard will verify the following. It will verify that both on-premises and Office 365 meet the prerequisites. It establishes the on-premises federation trust. It creates organization relationships. It will configure FreeBusy calendar sharing, message tracking, and mail tips, and it will configure secure mail flow between the two. It enables archiving support. So those are some of the features actually that you have now available to you that you didn't have when you have a separate deployment of Office 365 and Exchange Server 2010. So, ultimately you'll be able to have mail tips between you. You'll be able to move mailboxes from your on-premises to the cloud and back. You'll be able to utilize the same free busy calendar sharing and so on. And that's because there'll be organization relationships that can be created and sharing relationships as well. So these are things that if you're not entirely comfortable with what these things mean, organization relationships and sharing and the free busy calendar sharing options, that's probably because you're probably more comfortable with one or other type of deployment, either an on-premises or a hosted cloud solution. And so you don't have this typically coming up often. But you have to view, if you have both, your on-premises and Office 365, you have to see these as two separate organizations, really. And so you're actually making this agreement between these two separate organizations. You have to federate between the two, and then with the federation trust in place, you can now create this situation where you have this organization relationship, and users in each can see each other's calendar information and can share that type of interaction. But it's not the same as everybody being in the same organization. That's just not the case. Okay, so that's it when it comes to the federation, or rather the wizard, the hybrid configuration wizard. At this point, let's talk about address book policies, and then I promise after this we'll answer some of the questions that I see are coming in. So what's the real purpose of address book policies? Ultimately, even within one organization, there are times when administrators want to control or provide alternate views of the global address list. Now, I say that, and yet maybe in your organization you're sitting there going, no, I never want to do that. I never want to provide an alternate view of the global address list. Okay, here's a couple of reasons why you might want to do this. Your company, let's say, buys another company in who knows where. Australia, perhaps. Perhaps it's our friends in Australia that's on the call here. So they purchase the company and they decide, all right, well, these two companies don't necessarily need to play together. We want the other side to the company to still be under the same exchange organization. We want to make it simple in terms of management, but in reality, we don't need the company in Australia to see the global address list for the company that we have, that we've already founded and already have up and running. These two companies are separate. So you have options, of course. You could say, well, look, if they're separate, we could put an exchange server down in Australia and just give them completely their own, they already have their own email domain and so on. Maybe they have a hosted solution already, whatever the case. But you say, you know what, that doesn't make sense. I've got a perfectly good exchange server here that can handle more, so I want to put them under this exchange organization, and of course they'd have just an alternative domain name. All right, so you're looking at that, you want to split the global address list. How do you do it? Well, it used to be done differently with Exchange 2007, and Exchange, with Exchange 2010 it became more complicated. But the segmentation allows is valuable in larger organizations because what it does is it gives the user the ability to see an address list of persons who are local instead of the entire global address list by default. So that's why you would want to do this segmentation. Unfortunately, this segmentation is not easy to do in legacy versions of Exchange. That is anything that comes prior to Service Pack 2. So that's why they created address book policies. This will allow for global address segmentation capabilities. It provides subdivided address books. It actually provides a whole separate view for the offline address book, the various address lists, and typically when you want to do this in your organization, you don't just create one global address policy. You would, let's say in our case where we have purchased a company out of Australia, you would create two separate address book policies. And the reason for this is because one would segment the view so that only those in Australia can see only those people within their side of the company, and then you would create the other policy, if this is the way you wanted to do it, so that the people in, let's say, your company that currently exists can only see the people that are in that side of the company. Otherwise, if you only create one policy and apply it to Australia, well, that's great. That segments their view, but it doesn't do anything for the view of the people that are currently working in your company. So they can see not only all of them, all of their email addresses and contact information, but they can also see the people in Australia. And maybe that's not what you want. So you can use these address book policies. It's just a simple wizard to allow you to divide what people can see. And the application of these policies can be done either through PowerShell or through the Exchange control panel itself. So let's just go through address book policies. It replaces the traditional ACL-based global address list segmentation method, And for those of you, again, who have done this perhaps with your other versions of Exchange, you would recall that there's actually a document for Exchange 2007 on segmentation of the global address list. And so, again, it's a whole paper on it that has a variety of different steps, and it's a bit of a nightmare. So it's nice that you can do it this way. Address book policies can be managed through the Exchange Management Console and the Exchange Management Shell. And it allows you to control access based upon attributes, which would be custom attributes perhaps, or company or department, but not distribution list. So you can't control access based upon that. Planning is the key to address book policies. So first you create your address lists, you create your offline address book and additional global address lists, if you wish, if you want to have a separate one. And remember, you can't do that through the Exchange Control Panel. You have to do that through the Exchange Management Shell, or rather the Exchange Management Console. You can't do it through there. You have to do it through a PowerShell script in the Exchange Management Shell. Then what you would do is associate the address list, the offline address book, and the global address list to a policy, and then apply that policy to users. And again, this is easy. This is done either through the Exchange Management Console or through the shell. Very easy to apply these policies. Okay, before we get into Outlook Web App Mini, we're going to just pause for a second. I want to take a look at some of the questions that have come in and see if any of these can be answered right here. Let's see. One question came in regarding 2003 migration to 2010 and auto mapping. Let's see. When you did a native move, that's a big question. Why don't we save that one for offline? I can answer that perhaps through email. Do you need the X509 certificate for the hybrid? I don't quite see why you would run a hybrid instead of just on-premises or cloud. Hey, that's a great question, actually. So, in terms of the federation, with Exchange 2010, you don't need the X509 certificate for the hybrid to start. It's going to allow the federation, so long as you're able to do the cross-forest with your Outlook, or I'm sorry, Office 365, as long as you're able to get that in your Exchange Management Console, the wizard will run, it will federate with Microsoft and use everything self-sign, and you should be good to go. As far as why you would run just why would you run the hybrid, a lot of it has to do with just choices as far as a company that chooses to utilize the Office 365 deployment. And the reason for that, again, might be cost. It's something like $10 a user per month. So if you did have 100 temp workers come in and you didn't want to give them mailboxes in-house, you wanted to put them up in the cloud, you could do that. You could use it for other things. You could use it to ensure that your archive can be saved up in the cloud. You can use it to make sure that those individuals that are in the cloud have high availability that maybe you don't have on premises. So again, it really just depends. Let's see. Is hosted solution an upcoming replacement for the on-premise deployment? That's from Akash Phoenix. I'll be honest with you, I don't think so. Just in working with Exchange for all of this time and continuing to work with the Exchange team, a hosted solution has limitations. And so there's really, I don't see everyone switching over to a hosted solution anytime soon. It's great for small businesses. It's great for having a lot of enterprise features without having to spend all of the money, like high availability. That once you have a hosted solution, you're putting that on Microsoft, and you're saying, look, you're responsible for making sure my spam and viruses, are stopped at the front door. You're responsible for making sure my mailbox is always available, and you're responsible for making sure if there is a disaster that you can restore my stuff. So as long as they're willing to accept all that responsibility for $10 a month or $5 a month or whatever you're paying, whether it's Office 365 or some other solution, that's great. It's great for small businesses. However, for the on-premise deployment allows people to feel more secure. They prefer having their email in-house at times, and in certain environments, it's an absolute necessity. So I don't see on-premise going away anytime soon. Let's see. For those of us stuck for the time being on a narrow pipe to the internet, is the hybrid configuration a workable solution? Well, that's a good question, actually. Is it a workable solution? Yes. Does that mean that you want to now go moving mailboxes back and forth between your on-premises and your cloud environment? Not necessarily, because you're going to be using up that pipe. So you certainly lose out on some of the you certainly lose out on some of the value to the hybrid configuration when you have a bandwidth issue. But some of the other features, depending on your company, may be just what you need. Okay, let's see. I think at this point we'll just switch back, and I'll come back to some of these questions, and we'll see where we're at and answer some of these a little bit later. Oh, one question here. Does SP2 contain all prior hotfixes? The answer is yes. SP2 contains everything in the hotfixes and rollups that came prior to it. So that's another reason why, even if none of these features really if you look through all these features that we talk about today and you say, I can't benefit from any of these things, well, that's okay. Microsoft realized that. The Exchange team realized that. We're talking it's Service Pack 2. So we're not looking at, this isn't the next release of Exchange. This is just the Service Pack that adds on. So Service Pack 1 brought some really great features. Service Pack 2 and then Service Pack 3, you're looking at fewer features with this release of Exchange. All you can really hope for at that point is one of these really strikes your fancy and you really enjoy one of these features and you need it. Or if not, deploy Service Pack 2 anyway, because it's going to have all the hotfixes and it will have all of the pieces to the roll-ups. All right, let's talk about Outlook Web App Mini. Outlook Web App Mini is a super lightweight browser-based client for mobile devices, and it really goes right to bare-bones simplicity. All right, so you might say, this is great, this is brand new, but it's not. Outlook Web App Mini is not a new feature at all. It was in Exchange 2003 as Outlook Mobile Access, OMA. Not to be confused with your grandma. For those of you who are listening in from Germany, you know exactly what I mean there. So although the code is brand new, there's in this case there's no reused code from the older version apparently. That's what they're saying. So it doesn't have any of the same code from Outlook Mobile Access. So essentially OMA does the basics for us. It provides access to email, to calendar, to contacts, to tasks, and to the global address list. And you have the ability to respond to emails, to handle meeting requests, to create contacts and tasks, and to configure out-of-office message. And you can do more than that, of course, but it's really just the bare bones, the basics. So I wanted to show you what this looks like because I didn't want you to get confused with Outlook Web App Lite. So you realize that when you use Outlook Web Access or Outlook Web App, there's the premium version of this. And the premium version, they're trying to make it look more and more like Outlook itself. But if you select the little checkbox when you're logging in, you can get Outlook Web App Lite, which is what you see up top there. And you can see that it's, obviously it's nowhere near as robust and pretty as Outlook Web App Premium. But now if you look down at Outlook Web App Mini, you can see that this is bare bones. This is just pure HTML links that you can click and, take you to just the information you need. Obviously, this is super fast on mobile devices, especially those that maybe you're not looking at 3G or 4G networks perhaps. So this is it's a real lightweight browser-based, super fast flavor of things. So as far as how this works in terms of enabling this, if you enable Outlook Web App, which is enabled by default when you install Exchange 2010, if it's enabled, Outlook Web App Mini is enabled as well. So you might say, well, is there an easy way to turn this off? There isn't. There isn't an easy way to turn it off. And not that there's a big reason for it. If you are okay with Outlook Web App, then you should be okay with Outlook Web App Mini. There's no security breach there. It uses the same login mechanism, but it doesn't expose you to anything extra in terms of a problem within your organization. In fact, if you're looking at this from the folder structure in IIS, Outlook Web App is the primary virtual directory, and there's an OMA folder that is located underneath it. So it's using similar security mechanisms, and you can adjust that. Now you can turn it off. There's a PowerShell script you can use to turn it off, but it's not something that you have to really stress about in terms of it being there. In the same way you don't stress about Outlook Web App Lite. If Outlook Web App is on, you get Lite, and now you get Mini as well. The one thing you do have to keep in mind is that folks can't just get to it. If you notice in the actual picture of the iPhone there, you have to go to the OWA/OMA in order to access it. So that's just another part to things. It's not when you're in Outlook Web App Premium, you can click the little checkbox during the forms-based authentication, and it will bring you into Outlook Web App Lite. But with OA Mini, you have to literally know the URL. Okay, let's talk a little bit about cross-site silent redirection. There are several reasons why a user may be redirected within Exchange when working with Outlook Web App. It happens all the time actually. There's manual redirection. That's where a client access server has to redirect a user to another client access server within the proper Active Directory site that the user's mailbox is located. So that happens for any number of different reasons. Ultimately a user is connecting in, and depending on the URL they're using, perhaps they're connecting in with a client access server that's in the wrong site. And so it offers the opportunity to connect to the right site, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. There's temporary manual redirection. This is where the client's web browser has old DNS entries where direction is provided. So there's the temporary manual redirection, and then there's legacy silent redirection. Now this happens, and many of you who are in mixed environments, perhaps with coexistence going on between year 2010 and 2007, you know that at times your users, when they attempt to log in, maybe they're connecting to a 2010 server, client access server, but their mailbox is on a legacy version of Exchange. So the silent redirection is used to connect a user to that mailbox on that legacy version of Exchange. So these are the three normal Exchange 2010 redirection occurrences. Okay? If we look at it here, this is the pre-SP2 redirection process. The user attempts to log in through Outlook Web App. They get to a CAS server in Site A. The CAS server says, okay, this user is really connecting to the wrong site, looks for the mailbox, which is located in Site B, and then provides the user with a manual link. And you'll note, they get this screen, and it pretty much says you have to click this link in order to connect to the right server. Okay, is that really a big deal? No, it's not. But the concept of a single sign-on is important because when they redirect, they get the login again. So you can kind of see that that's nowhere near single sign-on. They get the form, they fill it out, the CAS server says, nope, no good, wrong site, sends them this link, they have to click the link, they get the form again, and now they can access their mailbox, right? So that's anything but a single sign-on experience. So now there's a fourth redirection process, cross-site silent redirection. If a user attempts to access Outlook Web App through their browser using a URL that connects to a CAS server in a site that's different from the AD site where the mailbox is being held, the redirection will point the user off to the proper server without manual intervention. Again, is this light years ahead of what we had? No, but it does resolve something. This was a complaint. Hey, I like the single sign-on. You put in your credentials, you're in, and now it's like they have to put it in twice. It kind of makes the Exchange team look a little silly, or rather, not the Exchange team, but your Exchange IT administration. They feel like, couldn't we do something better here? And so the Exchange team responded. Now, this feature is enabled through the Exchange Management Shell using the parameter that's listed here. You don't have to memorize this. You can certainly just look it up. But you'll note there's the dash cross-site redirect type silent. So the other type is manual. So there's two different types for the Outlook Web App Virtual Directory. All right, before we get into a new method for enabling the mailbox replication service, let's take a look at some of the questions that we have here. Some of the ones I didn't get a chance to answer just yet. All right, there's some specific questions. In which order do we have to install SP2? First CAS servers, etc. Yes, so that's a good question. That's the norm. If you are working in an environment where your roles are broken out, the proper order of installing of service packs would be the CAS server first, then your hub transport server, then your unified messaging server if you're utilizing unified messaging, and then your mailbox server. The edge transport servers don't really matter. You can do that before or after you do the others. but it's CAS, HT, UM, and then mailbox. Let's see. Is there any prerequisite to deploy SP2? No, there's no. I mean, there's the standard prerequisites for Service Pack 1 that you would need to look into. There may be a couple of hotfixes you need to deploy. I'm just trying to think now as far as the installation. There is one thing you need to do if it's a CAS server. There's an extra role that you need to add in on the IIS side, but that's the only prerequisite there for your CAS servers. Just to answer that fully, the TechNet site will give you all the prerequisites for that and give you the exact role that you need to install. It's kind of slipping my mind at this point. Is OMA enabled by default after the SP install? Yes, it's enabled by default, as we said. All right. Any advantage of OA Mini over Exchange Mail Client on Android, Apple, iOS devices? Not really. I mean, the OA Mini, you're talking with your Android device or your Apple, device, you have the ability typically and the bandwidth for a more robust, connection as far as Exchange. But if you're dealing with maybe an older phone or lower bandwidth, then you would go with Outlook Web App Mini. Let's see. There is no new tab on the user properties under mailbox features for OMA. There's some long questions here. We'll try to answer all of these. It's quite a bit. Okay, I think we answered a lot of these. Does the order of installation remain the same? Yeah, it is. It remains the same even in a mixed environment. Okay, so let's move back to the slides at this point, and we'll get back to questions a little bit later. A lot of questions. I commend everyone for taking the time to ask all your questions. We'll see if we can answer all of them within the hour, and if not, that's okay. We'll get back to everyone with email and make sure everybody gets their questions answered. The new method for enabling the mailbox replication service. Pre-SP2, MRS proxy, which is the mailbox replication service, essentially you had to turn this on. And the reason for that is because if you wanted to move mailboxes from your on-premises Exchange environment to Outlook.com or to another forest, you had to manually enable the MRS proxy service on the remote client access server. Now, to do that with legacy versions of Exchange, and again, when I say legacy, I mean everything prior to SP2 is considered legacy. Everything before 2010 SP2 is old. So with legacy flavors of Exchange, to enable the MRS proxy service, you had to go into the config.web file, which is located under, and here's the whole path: Program Files, Exchange Server, v14, Client Access, Exchange Web, EWS. And all you had to do is find the parameter, which is right down at the bottom of the file, and change that parameter to true. This really was not that difficult to do. It's really not that hard to find the file, open it up, change the parameter to true. And once you did that, it would turn on the service, the MRS proxy service, and then at that point you have a facilitation of the mailbox move requests and so on, because that service is there. Without it, you couldn't connect to Outlook.com or to another forest, and in this case, without it, you cannot connect to Office 365 for migration or coexistence scenarios. So it's essential, if you're going to have one of these coexistence scenarios with cross-forest moves, that you have to turn on this service. Okay, well, you can always, in the past, go into this file and turn it on. With SP2, you don't have to go crawling around the config.web file to enable the service. You simply use a commandlet. So with the commandlets new-web services virtual directory or set web-services virtual directory, you can enable the service with the -MRS proxy enabled parameter. Now the funny thing here is that in talking with a bunch of other folks about this and just getting their input on this change, some have said, you know what, I am so not into PowerShell that I would rather go crawling around for that config.web file and change that little piece to it and open it up. You open it up in Notepad and just change it to true, than actually have to type in this crazy, commandlet and remember how to do it and go get the code. And for many, this is really not an enhancement at all. They'd rather do the config.web. Unfortunately, here's the negative part. You don't have this option anymore with Service Pack 2. if you have Service Pack 2 installed, you can't just open up that the config.web file because it doesn't include the parameter anymore. So now you have to use the Exchange Management Shell, and you have to use the PowerShell commandlet. So they kind of fixed one thing and broke another in the process. In addition, you can also use the -mrs proxy max connections parameter, and that allows you to establish a connection limit. All right, so here's an example of the commandlet that you type in. Set-web services virtual directory, -identity, EWS, default website. You could put in the site, -mrs proxy enabled, $true, -mrs proxy max connections 50. Now, in doing this command, there's two things you've accomplished. The first is that you have enabled the mailbox replication service by putting the $true. The second is you've changed the max connections to 50. The default is 100. So using this commandlet as is right there, you would have changed it to 50. All right, let's talk about disabling Outlook mailbox auto mapping and why that's important. So with Exchange 2010 SP1, if a user is granted full access to mailboxes other than his or her own, the Auto Discover service will locate that mailbox, which could be in a completely different database. It could be on a completely different server. It could be in a completely different site, too. And what it does is it reaches out and it loads that for the Outlook user, so that now a user is granted the ability to see their mailbox as well as see the other mailbox, right? Well, if a user were to be granted full access to many mailboxes or shared mailboxes, then performance and stability would come into question with Outlook. So Outlook can only handle so much of this. And now you might say, well, how many people are typically given full access? You might have an assistant that is given full access to, their boss's mailbox. Okay, so maybe one, maybe two mailboxes at the most. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about situations where, let's say you're an admin that, there's a variety of shared mailboxes that you're utilizing, and you have access to all of them. Past a certain point, Outlook is going to suffer. So the idea is, well, how do we turn this off? This is called mailbox auto mapping. How do we disable this if we want to? Well, with Service Pack 2, administrators can disable the auto mapping feature by using the Exchange Management Shell. So in order to do that, they use the add-mailbox permission commandlet with the new -auto mapping parameter and set it to false. So here's an actual example of the full command where in this command a person is given full access to another user's mailbox and the auto mapping is turned off at the same time. So here it's add-mailbox permission, the shared mailbox, and then the user, the one that's delegated access, and then the access right is full access, the inheritance type is all, and auto mapping is false. So again, you don't have to remember this. The main thing is to remember the point that in this case you have the ability to turn off the auto mapping for those mailboxes. So now, obviously if you have a bunch of mailboxes that have already been listed out, then you can use PowerShell scripts to, to commands to pull them together and to turn off the auto mapping for any of those ones that have already been given full access permissions. Okay, before we go into multi-valued custom attributes, let's just take a look at some of our questions again. Let's see. Did the auto mapping add also the mailbox granted by the users via Outlook? I'm not sure I understand that question. When does the search take place on each Outlook open, or only when creating a new mail profile? I'm assuming when Outlook. Yeah, it takes place when Outlook opens. So that's again one of the issues there. So, and it's again, if you have one or two mailboxes that you have full access to, it's not going to cause you a problem. It's really for those that have a variety of different shared mailboxes and so on that it starts to break things. Let's see. Can we download the presentation? Let's see. Can we download the presentation afterwards, just the PowerPoint without sound? That is a good question, Michael. I'll let Miles answer that later on because I don't know if they make the PowerPoint available, but you're welcome to it. Let's see. This is a good question. I mean, do you feel Exchange 2010 server is very effective and useful? I've worked with every flavor of Exchange going all the way back to, I think, 4.0, which was the first one. And, of course, each time the the enhancements that are made, I think, are valuable. That's not to say that I'm a cheerleader for each and every flavor of Exchange, but I think that 2007 was revolutionary. I think that the features that have come with 2010, like the ability to have database availability groups with a pretty cheap price tag on them, what they give us in terms of high availability is impressive. The archive abilities that are included are not phenomenal because I think third-party solutions do a better job, but it's nice to know that it's included, that Microsoft provides that. I think that role-based access control is an excellent way to address the ability to delegate responsibilities off to others without fearing that you're giving them too much control. I feel that the multi-mailbox search capabilities are nice for discovery, although again I think that third-party solutions do a much better job when it comes to being in line with compliance and so on, with regulatory compliance and Sarbanes-Oxley. So do I think Exchange 2010 is very effective and useful? The answer is yes. I'm a huge fan of 2010. I'm a big proponent of all that it's done in terms of giving businesses what they need. Do I think it's perfect? No. There's obviously things that need to continue to be evolved and developed, and that's why I'm excited to work on the TAP program for E15, which is the next flavor of Exchange. So that's a good one there. That's a good question. Okay, so we'll move back over. Here's a question. Is it possible to turn off auto mapping prior to SP2? I don't really know, Michael. That's a great question. I would say no, because I don't believe that was even a feature in or in anyone's thoughts or considerations prior to SP2. But that's a great question. That's something I'll have to ask the Exchange team if there's some kind of hoops that we can jump through to turn it off prior to Service Pack 2, and I'll have to get back to you on that. All right, let's talk about multi-valued custom attributes. All right, so I wish I could actually see all of you. There's about 200 in attendance here. You're all Exchange administrators, and I really would love to ask this question of a nice cross-section of individuals. So you're welcome to use the question portion here to maybe answer my question. There are 15 custom attributes. We have had these for years, and some folks use those custom attributes for a reason, but most Exchange administrators that I've ever talked to don't even touch those. They're easy to locate. You can find them, like for a user, you can just go into the user's properties, and it's right there on the general tab. There's a little box for the attributes. And the nice thing is it's actually something you can work with through the GUI. So you can add these attributes in right there. So I'll ask you folks, and you're welcome to respond back. Do you use these 15 custom attributes? And if so, for what? Now, if your answer is no, well, then don't respond, because I think that the majority of you will say no, we don't use it. We don't use these custom attributes. If you are using them for something, perhaps you can explain what you're using them for. And I'm actually seeing some responses, nope, yes, no. Okay, so again, if you're not using them, that's fine. Most of you probably aren't. But if you are, tell me what you're using them for. Now, here's what's exciting with Service Pack 2. With Service Pack 2, there are 5 new multi-valued custom attributes that you can use to store additional information for mail recipient objects. 5 more. Now, here's the only thing. They are not visible in your Exchange Management Console. So the 15 custom attributes are still there. They're available through the GUI, but you cannot access these 5 multi-valued attributes through the console. Now, we say multi-valued, and that's because the 15 custom attributes, you can only put one value in there, a word or whatever it is. Whatever the value is, it's only one. With the 5 attributes, these are extension custom attributes. They're extension custom attribute 1 to extension custom attribute 5, and each of these can hold up to 1,300 values. So 1,300 values, I mean, that's just phenomenal. And you can specify values as a comma-delimited list. Now, let me just say, Service Pack 2 training, some of you perhaps have watched my Exchange 2010 administration course, and if you've watched it recently, you know that we also did an update to it with Service Pack 1 training, back when Service Pack 1 was released last year. Well, as of last week, we released 10 new videos for Service Pack 2 training, and so those are all included in the Exchange 2010 administration training course. So, I mean, it's huge at this point. There's I think, over 25 hours of training included in that one course. And when I do the demonstration on multi-valued custom attributes, I don't do it just as a slide like I'm doing now. In fact, with all of the different pieces to Service Pack 2, there's demonstrations involved. So for a webinar, it's just easier to talk about the features. But when we do the screencast videos that are included in the course, I just want you to know that there are demonstrations for each of the videos. And in this case, with multi-valued custom attributes, I really felt it was necessary to demonstrate how you see these attributes, how you use these attributes, because it's going to take some creativity on your part to figure out why you might utilize these attributes in your life as an Exchange admin. So we try to show some demonstrations on accessing the attributes and adding values to them. Unfortunately, just for the webinar, we're just explaining how they work. Now, some of the commandlets that support the new parameters include set distribution group, dynamic distribution group, mailbox, mail contact, mail public folder, and remote mailbox. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the responses that we've gotten. We've got a ton of responses here as far as why people utilize these. It says some say we've used them in the past for multi-forest migrations to denote which forest a mailbox came from so that it could be searched more easily. We use several, and multi-value might be useful in our environment. Some use is transitory for certain projects. Some uses for business values that we do not want to add to the schema. Very good, excellent. One person said customers use custom attributes for a variety of things, but a couple of major ones are to assist in archival categorization and for migrations. And it's true, actually, with these custom ones that are extensions, one of the recommendations is that it can be used for things like maintenance that's been done on an individual's account, finding a way to kind of tap into the fact that now there's these links there that are these hooks that have been built into the account for these extension attributes, and creating applications that are built off the PowerShell code that allow you to just connect right in and add data to those users that now can be searched for, and now you can actually pull that information back out when you need it. Let's see. In my organization, we use custom attribute for Quest Sync address book. I've personally used that to show IP phone and user property. So okay, well, this is great. It looks like a lot of you are using the custom attributes. Again, no doubt the overwhelming majority are not, but that's just the way it is. Some companies have found a good use for these. Very good. Okay, the next one is litigation hold adjustment, and it's our last feature for Service Pack 2. It's important, if you're not really too sure what litigation hold is all about, I'll just explain. As a result of both regulatory compliance with a variety of legislation like Sarbanes-Oxley and others, and the need for easy discovery in the event of a lawsuit, Microsoft added a feature into Exchange called litigation hold. Okay. Oh, and just a note for the one that asked about the download, we did receive word back. I received word back that yes, the PowerPoint will be available. So let's see. So as a result of this, Microsoft added a feature into Exchange called litigation hold or legal hold. So the purpose of litigation hold is to prevent a user from deleting important email correspondence from their own account in order to avoid the discovery process. So think about this. I mean, if you're under investigation and they say, hey, you're being investigated for whatever fraud or whatever type of sexual harassment or whatever it is, and you know that you've got that data in your mailbox, you're thinking, I got to get it out of there. I've got to delete this, right? That's just a normal human, fight or flight response. Well, obviously the key then is to put the mailbox on litigation hold before the person is notified of the litigation side. Even if you do, though, you as an Exchange administrator may be required to go back through whatever archive or go back through whatever you might use journaling or whatever you're using or some kind of third-party archiving. You need to provide discovery, and it has to be valid. Otherwise, you can come under various fines and sanctions because you are not working in harmony with what your company is stipulated for with regard to legislation. So the purpose of litigation hold is to be able to take a mailbox and say, this mailbox cannot have anything deleted. So you might say, well, if I have to enable this feature, couldn't this person have just deleted that information months ago when they sent it? And that's honestly true. They can. They can delete that information at any time. And so you say, okay, well, I'll use the Exchange archiving feature. But I'll be honest with you, if you use the Exchange archiving feature, they have the ability, a user by default has the ability to delete stuff out of the archive as well. So that's one of the negatives here. Microsoft provided a number of great tools that when used together may provide a full, compliance on your part with your company with regard to the various laws that are in place. Then again, if you don't use them properly, or if you only use part of them, or if you're not really, sure what the law is in your regard, you could be completely, at odds with regulatory compliance. So it's often very good to have experts come in and determine what you need to do. And oftentimes, especially with larger organizations, you need some kind of third-party solution to help you with this. Now, because legal hold is an emerging science, it required some tweaking. And that's what SP2 provides. It doesn't really change the whole process. It just provides a little bit of tweaking. So with Service Pack 2, you can no longer disable or remove a mailbox that has been placed on litigation hold. Right? Now, this is something that an administrator was able to do before. They were able to either disable or remove a mailbox. And that's kind of a silly thing because obviously if the mailbox is on hold, then you don't want that to be the default behavior. This restriction can be bypassed by an administrator, but not without some effort. So an admin now with Service Pack 2 can either remove the hold or can use the new ignore legal hold switch parameter when removing or disabling the mailbox through the Exchange Management Shell. And this will be auditable, right? I say it will be auditable, sort of. That's just my own way of taking a swipe at the fact that there's ways to adjust the logs too. So it's not like it's written in stone. But ultimately, when an administrator turns off legal hold, or when an administrator uses a parameter like this, the ignore legal hold switch, that should be auditable, and so there should be some record that they did that. And that's very important because in some environments there's one administrator, so everything that took place that person did it. But in some large environments, it's good to know who does what, and if someone did, if someone was asked to do this without proper permissions, they bypass it and they remove the mailbox altogether. Whatever the case, if they did that, it should be audited, and you should be able to see the records of that. So here's a list of the commandlets that allow for the new ignore legal hold parameter. You can see disable mailbox, remove mailbox, and so on. All right, so just a quick review of the best new features of Service Pack 2 because we are running down to the wire here. We have 2 minutes to go. In our webinar today, we talked about the hybrid configuration wizard, address book policies, Outlook Web App Mini, cross-site silent Outlook Web App redirection. We discussed the new method for enabling the mailbox replication service, and for some, the old method worked just fine. We should have left it at that. For others, maybe you're friends with PowerShell now, and so perhaps you have no trouble using the script. We discussed disabling Outlook Mailbox auto mapping, multi-valued custom attributes, and it looks like some of you in the audience are going to really enjoy that feature, and the litigation hold adjustments. As far as contact information, if you want to learn more about Exchange 2010, you can watch one of these training courses from TrainSignal. I personally did each and every one of these courses. So there's administration training, which now includes Service Pack 2, design and deployment training, backup and recovery, and unified messaging training. We also have a new course coming out in the next couple of months that really deep dives into high availability, and then one after that on virtualization. You're welcome to read my InfoWorld column at Enterprise Windows, and you can see the link there. And if you'd like to get in touch with me personally, especially some of you have a great deal of questions here, you can email me at peter@trainsignal.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at jpbruzzese. So at this time, I'm going to turn things over to Miles. He has 1 minute to wrap things up, and I hope everybody enjoyed the webinar today.
Thanks, Peter. So that's all the time we have for today. Thanks again for attending and for everyone's participation. Now, as a reminder, today's webinar was recorded and will be available tomorrow at trainsignal.com/blog/webinars. And as I mentioned earlier, you will need to fill out that survey for a chance to win the Exchange Server 2010 course by J. Peter. The winner will be sent an email. Thanks again, and everyone have a great day.